Today is July 24th, 2013, 8:30 a.m., and we're sitting with Mr. Pete Pleasant.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say we could pick up where we left off, but we discussed quite a bit last time, so wherever you would like to start would be
Well, I guess
fine.
the main thing you're looking for is how things have changed, as I remember, from a little kid to today, and
Right.
that type of thing. In Craig, type of people involved, what not have you. Basically speaking, the things I remember when I was a little kid, and you know, you just went all over town. We didn't have any vandalism. We didn't have any problems at all. We probably had 2 policemen who didn't work but 5 days a week because nothing happened on Saturday and Sunday except a few fights at the local bars at night and that type of thing. Kind of going back here, starting in the 400 block on Yampa, on the east side was the south end, kind of where the fire station is now. That general area was the Glen Hotel and restaurant and pinball Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Then next to it was Dr. Snyder, and he had an apartment and had his office in there. We had Brinkley's Hardware in there. Eventually their building had burned down at 101 West Victory Way when the theater burned down. And Jay Brinkley moved down on the Yampa Avenue. Next was the post office. Then we had Johnson's Appliance. That's where Flint is now. Then in 47 or 48, they built the J.C. Penney store and the Palace Drug Store. Lou Wyman built it. Going across the street, in the 500 block on the east side, we had Tucker Brothers Texaco. We had the Gregory Grocery Store where the Pack Center is. Where Billy Terrell is the Elks Club. Then we had Barrett's Men's Store. We had Fuss's Bakery. We had the Blue Goose. Next to the Blue Goose was a little 5-foot wide by 25-foot long business, and that business probably started in the late 40s, and that was called Molly's Steno Shop. My dad was an attorney in town. He always needed a legal secretary. Molly had lived in Hot Sulphur Springs. She came to Craig and went to work for my father in his law office. There was not a lot of legal work to be done. Molly went to work about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning. My dad dictated to her. She typed up his stuff, and down the road we went. My dad always left the office at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go across the alley to play a game of pool or two, or to bowl a line while Molly was doing her work. He would come back about 4 o'clock, and Molly would be gone from the office. And there was only one entrance into the office, and that was through the front door, the long hallway, and my dad's office was in the back of the building. He'd ask the people who worked in the front if they saw Molly leave. Nobody ever saw Molly leave, but he couldn't figure out how she was getting out of the office every day when she wasn't there when he went back to work. Finally, one day he went across the street, sat in a car, and watched, and Molly was crawling out a window which emptied into the alley. It was one of the old roll-out type windows. Molly was fairly large. She kind of had to squeeze through the window to get out every day when she went home. He sat over there and watched one day and caught her coming out of the window, and she kind of got She had a little trouble getting out of the window, and then it was about a 3-foot drop down to the alley. So she had her back to him when she hit the alley, and he was standing there waiting for her, and wrote her last paycheck, and Molly no longer worked for my dad, and she opened Molly's Steno Shop in the 500 block on Yampa Avenue. Molly had grab bags in there. She had 2-cent, 5-cent, and 10-cent grab bags. She bought all the old stale candy that you could buy and put in the grab bags. She had a great used comic section in there, and that's where all the kids hung out, because for 2 or 3 cents or a nickel, you could always go to Molly's and get a grab bag every day, and you could always talk your folks out of a nickel and that type of thing. I was one of Molly's better clients, and I think Molly always had the old stale, really stale candy and that type of thing in the sack that she was going to sell me, just as kind of get back at me and my dad. But it was, everybody hung out there, everybody knew Molly. Every once in a while somebody go in and dictate to Molly, and she'd type up their legal papers or whatever they wanted, and that's why it was called Molly's Steno Shop. Next to it was the Esquire Liquor, and there was a beauty shop, then a vacant lot that's still there. Where the community budget center was the Craig Motor Company. They sold GMCs, Buicks, and there was a gas pump that sat right in the middle of the sidewalk in front where you could fill up with gas. I can't remember who was next to that. Then there was a shoe shop, and then Irick Saddle Shop, then the Safeway store, and then the parking lot. And that was kind of what I remember as a young boy in Craig. And when you went into these stores, you knew everybody in town. They knew you. If you were short 25 cents of being able to pay them, I just said, that's all right, the next time you come in, pay us. And usually you went home and got the 25 cents you owed them and came back and paid them the same day. But no, everything was cash. Nothing was checks. Credit cards were unheard of. Some of the businesses ran accounts for people, and like the farmers and the ranchers, they paid their bill once a year. Nobody charged them any interest for what they had. I mean, you just took a man at his word was what you did. Starting on 4th Street on the west side of the Yampa Avenue, first thing there was the El Rey Club, which is now Mathers. They had 2 bowling alleys down the basement. Can't remember the lady's name that ran it. Her brother was Gene Hunt. They had dancing, they had everything. It's pretty similar to the way it is today. And the big parking lot next to it was the Yampa Hotel. That was the place where all the sheep herders stayed when they came to town and got paid. It was between the El Rey Club and the White Horse and close to the Popular Bar, so they could spend all of their money in the bars. They got rolled quite frequently, and all their money was taken, and then they had to go back to work herding sheep. The White Horse Inn there is kind of world famous. Castine's ran it, but it was quite a deal. Millie and Bruce, who ran the White Horse, when I was between the 7th and 8th grade, I worked for the local beer distributor, delivering beer. You tapped the kegs. There was an opening in the sidewalk. You went down underneath the floor of the White Horse, crawled back in there about 20 feet to tap the beer kegs. Millie couldn't get in there, Bruce didn't like to go in there, and so it was my job on Saturdays when we weren't open at the distributing company Millie'd call me at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night on Saturday and say, would you come down and tap some more kegs for us? So I'd go down and open up the hatch out on the sidewalk and go underneath and tap a couple more beer kegs and go home. Next to that was the Greeley Gas Company. There were a number of businesses in there, barber shop, plus the Greeley Gas. There was a liquor store right on the corner, which Wood Spence owned. That building, that area now is where Ron Schaefer owns and has Victory Vision. There's a computer shop in there, a bookkeeping shop, or income tax deal, and an insurance agency. Across the street from that on the north side was the Moffat County State Bank. Then going up the street, there was the Craig Drug, the Midwest Cafe, Dr. Snyder office, and also a doctor's office in there. Then was the Baker Barn Hotel, Seabit's Hardware, then some more doctor's offices, Julia Carpenter's insurance agency and apartments, a vacant lot, and then where, across from the vacant lot just north of where Alice Pleasant Park is right now, is Chamberlain Brothers Auto Parts. Then the telephone office was there. That's when nothing was mechanical in the telephone office. You would pick up the phone, an operator would answer, you would give her the number that you wanted to call. If that number had a letter at the end of it, like 176J, that meant it was a party line. She would pull a bunch of cords out, plug them in different places, and connect you with 176J. You knew all the telephone operators, they knew who you were, and so you had a conversation with them while you were waiting for the people to answer the telephone. Next to that was the National Guard Armory, which is the museum where we are right now. On Victory Way, the big business on Victory Way was the Cosgrove Hotel, which was east of Russell Street. And Toby Herman had coming to the west. On the west side of Russell was Tobias Herman's filling station. Next to that was Brown's Cafe, and that was it there. And then there was a parking lot on Yamp Avenue. After the Greeley Gas Building across the alley was the Popular Bar, Ferguson Douglas Motors. They sold Chryslers, Diamond T trucks, and they had a Phillips 66 gas pump. Across from there was the Mobile Station and Tire Shop, then Rogers Hardware, and then across the alley from there was the Zimmerman Abstract Company, and then the Steel Conoco Station. On the north side of Victory Way, starting on Russell, on the west or on the east side was Northwest Sales. Across the street from that was the Alamo Hotel, which also housed a deal called Woody's Cleaning Shop. Then there was the West Theater. Other than that, the rest of it, I've kind of got a map here I'll give you. We talked about a lot of things. I think the big thing was that you knew everybody in Craig and everybody knew you. I remember a postcard that was printed, and what was on the front of the daily paper or the weekly paper was that we had 3,000, I think, and 93 people is what we had in Craig. And I think that was the 1950 census. I could be wrong. I've still got some of the postcards. I should have brought one with me. Everybody hunted, everybody fished. There was a lot of bartering going on. We had an oil boom in the an oil drilling boom in the late 40s and early 50s, which brought a lot of people to town. We had a refinery, which was basically at the intersection of Highway 40 and 13 west of Craig now. Texaco Refinery. They refined gas. That was one of the big deals on the railroad, was shipping gas out of here after it was refined and that type of thing. Wheat farming was a big deal. A lot of cattle, a lot of sheep. We were the largest wool shipping port or dock, I guess you might say, in the United States. I don't know how many sheep there were in the county and the area at that time, but there were trainload after trainload of wool went out of here and went back to the woolen mills in the Boston, Massachusetts area to be refined, to be cleaned and that type of thing and made into fabric.
Right. Did you ever go in the Cosgriff Hotel?
You lived in the Cosgriff Hotel.
No.
They had a bar in the Cosgriff Hotel. If you didn't get there by 3 o'clock in the afternoon on any given day, you didn't have a place to sit. They had a restaurant in there. They served a smorgasbord on Saturday night, which drew people from 100 miles away every Saturday night. I remember my dad complaining one time when the price went from $3 to $3.50 for the smorgasbord. Severino Nicoletto, who was the chef, did all kinds of ice sculptures during the week, and this was something you'd expect to see at the Brown Palace Hotel in Denver or Las Vegas or something like that. It was quite a deal. Cosgriff, Craig was located 200 miles from Denver, 300 miles from Salt Lake on Highway 40, and there were no interstates, so if you had salespeople who were traveling, or anybody who was traveling from Denver to Salt Lake, the right way to go was through Craig, Colorado on Highway 40, and you automatically spent the night and usually ate. You did eat at the Cosgriff. It was the place to eat. It was the social center of Craig, and it didn't. I can't tell you how many, probably in those days, $500,000 deals. Today they'd be $5 million deals. Were started and consummated at the bar at the Cosgriff Hotel. Big land transactions. That's where all the wool buyers met to buy wool. It's where the cattle buyers met with the local ranchers to buy their livestock. It was like a business center. That's what it was. Had the same waitresses for God knows how many years. Rose Scott was her name. She worked only at the counter at the Cosgriff, which probably seated 14, 16 people. Everybody had their same seat at the same time at the Cosgriff in the morning. When he went in there, Rose waited on you. And you usually didn't have to order breakfast. She knew what you wanted and just brought it to you. So my grandfather would go down there and eat every morning, and he took his own maple syrup down by the quart jar full, and he would leave it at the Cosgriff, and at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, they'd put it in a pan of hot water to warm it up for him. His idea was that there's nothing spoils a good hot cake other than cold syrup, so I gotta have some hot syrup for my hot cake. Trying to think here, jumping around a little bit on the location of things, at the corner of Bree Street and Yamp Avenue on the west side of the street was where Brinkley's Hardware and then the West Theater was. I remember I was in about the 3rd grade when those buildings burned down one afternoon. On the east side of Bree Street there, Harry Hansen had a Conoco station, and he was the last place in Craig to sell ice. Not everybody had refrigerators, and you had what they called ice boxes. Then they would cut the ice out of the river in the winter, and then it was stored in a warehouse down next to the railroad tracks there at the Bree Street and the railroad tracks. Put it in sawdust, layers of sawdust, and then it would not melt. And then Harry would go down there and get a 200-pound block of ice and bring it up to his Conoco station. And people traveling through the country, that tourists and this type of thing, they like to always buy a little ice and that type of thing. That was kind of the way I think they used air conditioning in cars. They always had a fan up on the front of the dashboard, which was basically the defroster. Old cars did not have defrosters. They had a fan up there, an oscillating fan that would go back and forth. But those were things, that you don't think about anymore. Across the street going up Bree Street, we had the city hall up there, which also housed the one fire truck we had in town. That building is now owned by Mrs. Stetson and is an office complex. South it was service cleaners, then the apartment house was there. The rest of it was pretty much residential.
Do you remember anything about making ice skating rinks out of a parking lot?
Well, we had probably 4 or 5 ice skating rinks when I was a little kid. The first one I remember was in City Park, and the guy that ran it was a Mr. Wright, and all they did was take a motor grader over there and go around in a circle till they got a little bit of berm build up that was 2 or 3 feet high. And then in October, November, he'd go to a fire hydrant and start putting water out there, and it looked like a lake, but you had to get the ground absorbed with water, or if you didn't, when you tried to flood it when it was real cold, because of the heat coming up from the ground, it would heave and you'd have bad ridges in it and that type of thing. And then they had 2 or 3 big fire pits over there. One year, a couple of years, they did have turn right around and had a little building over there, so that, for lack of better words, call it a warming hut. The other ice skating rink I remember is where the parking lot to City Market is now, and that was done the same way as the park was done, but they quit doing it in the park and did it down where City Market is now. There was one later on that was up here where Bob Meckley's tree farm is, but that was in probably the 70s and 80s. But, you ice skated a lot at night. You gathered up your ice skates, you walked to the skating rink, you put them on. You had a lot of clothes on, be 15 or 20 below. That was entertainment. We didn't have TVs. You know, you made your own fun.
Mm-hmm.
You got up early in the morning during the summer. At 8 o'clock you left the house. You went someplace and played baseball or football. We had what we call work-up baseball games. The guy that had the best bat and the best ball, he always got to be the first batter.
Mm-hmm.
One person batted at a time, and the outfielders, and you worked yourself up through every position on the baseball field, and after you were the catcher, then you finally got to be the batter, and you got to have 3 outs, and then you went to the outfield, and the guy who was the catcher, he moved up. You didn't go home for lunch very often. You went to somebody else's house, or they all came to your house, and then about 5:30 at night, the dinner bell would ring, and that was time for baseball game to break up, or football game, and everybody went home and ate. At night, you got together with your family, you walked downtown, you visited with people, and that was the entertainment.
Right.
We had I just barely remember a golf course at the fairgrounds, which was all sand and weeds. There was no grass. You had sand greens. You had a little apparatus when you got ready to putt. It was just a piece of pipe that you drug across the sand to try to level it out and to walk, to put the ball in the hole when it came time to putt. But that was what they did. There was where the middle school is now was where the softball field is, or was at that time, right across from Come and Go. Football games were played in the arena at the fairgrounds. That's also in the summertime was later on one of the softball fields. We had great softball teams here, really good fast pitch softball. We had 3 or 4 teams that actually won the state fast pitch softball tournament in Pueblo and Trinidad and other places. But the grandstand probably seated 700 to 800 people. It was free to get in. They passed the hat to pay the light bill. And on good nights out there, and you played Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 2 games. On good nights, you couldn't find a place to sit in the grandstand. One of the teams was sponsored by the people who ran sheep. That was called the Craig Rams. We had Craig Rams. They were an excellent team. We had Palace Drug. They were very good. Moffat County Creamery kind of took over when the Craig Rams disbanded. But it was entertainment.
Right.
You know, and that's what people did. We had teams from Mount Harris, a couple teams from Hayden. Every once in a while, Rangeley, which in the late 40s was heavy in the oil business, they had real good teams in Rangeley. And on Sunday, you'd travel to Rangeley and play 3 or 4 softball games, or you might go to Maker, or might go to Hayden and play, or those teams would come here, and you'd have a little tournament. But that was the way we entertained one another.
Right. And how did all of that entertainment and kind of the face of all of these shops, how did all of that change through the booms? There were a few booms you've mentioned.
Well, probably the oil boom changed, but they weren't real successful in the oil boom, at least as far as close to Craig was concerned. When they were drilling, they didn't have the moxie or the technology, I guess you'd call it. You could drill down, and when you hit gas, that ended the drilling process.
Right.
Because they had to shut the gas off some way, and you couldn't continue to drill through the gas. So they abandoned those sites, cemented them in, and that type of thing. Probably the next big thing to hit was the uranium mill, and that changed a lot of things. It was north of Maybell, north and east of Maybell. It was a big project. Union Carbide was involved, and I don't remember who all, but it kept a lot of people busy, and it operated for a number of years. I think the thing that changed there was as technology advanced, the people who had to run these things and come in and do it were outsiders. We were a rural type community, and a lot of the people didn't have the knowledge to do those things, and that's when people, we got an influx of people coming into the community, and people from the city, people higher education, you might say, and that type of thing. It was good it made the community advance to keep up with the influx of people and that type of thing. I think everybody hunted, everybody fished. Fishing season was not year-round like it is now. Fishing season opened on the third Saturday of May at noon. And everybody went fishing on that third Saturday. I forget when it was over with. Sometime in October it usually ended. There was no night fishing, no ice fishing. It was strictly stream and river and lake fishing. It was what it amounted to. Hunting season usually was 2 weeks. You had combination, you hunted deer and elk for that 2-week period of time. When I was a kid, we did not have any antelope in the country until after the winter of 47 and 48, when the winter drove them out of Wyoming into Colorado and Moffett County. I know the first animal I killed of that type was an antelope. I was 12 years old. There was a season in the Sandwash, and they had some extra licenses left over, so my dad and I went and bought a license apiece. That was the first time I had ever done any big game hunting. Always had hunted ducks and geese, and sage chickens and grouse and that type of thing. Now deer and elk season is open from about Labor Day till the 15th of January. They have ranching for wildlife and that type of thing, and it's, to me, it's not hunting anymore. Everybody, you used to go out, park your vehicle, walk 2 or 3 miles, get an animal, get it back to the vehicle, and go down the road. But now everybody's got 4-wheelers and that type of thing, and in the mountains you hunted on horses, you set up tents, and you went for a week at a time and tried to get, you were trying to get meat to live on during the winter time. And that's what hunting was all about. So and we did, in the early to late 50s, deep freezes became available. So everybody bought a deep freeze with the idea that that's where you stored your meat. The ranchers, they all had what we called spud cellars, which were underground huts, and that's where they hung their meat, let it cure out, and they didn't have, a lot of them didn't have electricity, a lot of them didn't have, so no electricity, no refrigeration. But the REA, when it was developed in the mid to late 50s gave the farmers and the ranchers in the outlying area, you know, for the first time, they had electricity
Mhm.
with the Rural Electrification Association. So
Mhm.
that was good. That was progress.
Wow.
I think, you know, for people of my age and that type of thing, we've seen a lot of changes. I would tell you that I think most of them have probably been for the better.
Mhm.
Some of them have not been,
Mhm.
but it's a way of life, and you have to learn to live with it and go down the road.
Right.
You know, one of the things that they're talking about is the Cosgrove Hotel right now, and the hotel, museum. They're doing a little bit of digging for more information, so I was just wondering if you had any stories of interesting characters that you remember when you would go to the Cosgrove Hotel, or...
Well, there were a number of things. Let's go to the museum since we're sitting here. In the basement of the museum was a swimming pool.
Mhm.
Now, that was an indoor pool, of course, and that type of thing. And when I was a little kid, if you wanted to swim, you went to Juniper Springs. It's about 20 miles west of Craig, to the Juniper Hot Springs, or you went to Steamboat Springs. Those were the
Mhm.
closest swimming pools. I have no idea about the one in the museum. I never swam in it. I never talked to anybody who really did say they swam in it. I know the first swimming pool we had in Craig, everything was done with volunteer work. And that swimming pool did not last too long, and then it collapsed. And then during the uranium boom, we put another swimming pool over there, which was once again all volunteer work.
Mhm.
Contractors dug the hole, people with shovels, went over and did this, that, and the other thing. And now the complex is really one of the nicest on the western slope,
Mhm.
with the wave pool and a few other things. But once again, that was technology was what it was that makes those things available. Or before, everything was pretty much manual labor.
Right.
But we worked, all the kids worked on it, the parents worked on it. When the golf course was built, that was all volunteer labor. Everybody had, 8 or 10 families had an area for each hole. They had to get the weeds mowed down, the grass cut, get it ready so that they could bring in motor graders and that type of thing to do that. But it was, the first 9 holes was pretty much voluntary work. I know I worked on that in my spare time. The Cosgrove, we had a lot of characters at the Cosgrove. Some of the people who, the people who worked there, most of them were characters. And, it was just, the Cosgrove was just the social center of everything for 25 or 30 years that I can remember.
Mhm.
Just trying to think of some of the characters in town. We had one thing I remember was the local dynamite man was called Stinkfoot Black, and Cooney and Ballack, there was a water line near the VFW that went across fortification, and it was, needless to say, on each side of fortification was probably 4 or 5 feet in the ground, and when spring runoff would come, fortification would freeze during the winter, and the ice flows as they came down the creek would get against that pipe, and they would, against that water line, and they would kind of plug up the dam, and then the thought was that if the water line broke, there'd be no water going to Rosedale, which was east of Fortification Creek. And so Cooney and Bally could take with a piece of equipment down there and keep the ice from backing up against the water line. Well, there was a lot of ice one year, and they couldn't keep up with it, and so they hired Stinkfoot to go over there and dynamite the ice. And it was also dammed up down where Fortification crosses the railroad tracks. So Stinkfoot went over there and dynamited the ice away from the line, but he should have gone south of there to the railroad tracks to dynamite first, so when all the water started coming down, the ice jam at the railroad tracks was not dynamited yet, and it flooded. And it flooded from Fortification Creek all the way to Dead Man's Curve, which is probably a mile east of Craig, right across where Highway 40 goes now, where Perulis's have their truck line, where the Boys and Girls Club. That was all water, and you couldn't get to Craig. And it was that way for a couple of weeks. I know we came home from Denver, and we had to hire Joe Edwards in his little rowboat. We parked it over around Dead Man's Curve, left the car there, and Joe brought us across where all the water was. It went all the way down to where the bank of the West is now, and that's where you could get out of your boat and go home.
Wow.
So, but Stinkfoot lived in north of town. If you needed to find Stinkfoot, you went to the Blue Goose Club, which was across from the Baker Bar, and it was a pool hall, and that's where Stinkfoot hung out all the time. We had Goat Mary, who lived north of town. She raised goats. She was a character in town. Her verbiage was very limited, mostly cuss words, and she didn't like to be spoken to or to speak to people, and if she did, the air got a little bit blue. Probably one of the real characters we had in town was Millie Castine, who ran the White Horse. Millie was very musically talented, could play the piano by ear, could sing 500 songs. You just tell her what you wanted to hear, she could play it on the piano and sing the lyrics to it. Millie could smoke a cigarette from start to finish, walk up and down the street, and when she finished that cigarette, the ashes from when she started to when she finished were still on the cigarette. I never saw a lady that could smoke a full cigarette and all the ashes were still there.
Mm-hmm.
That was, everybody used to marvel at Millie about being able, don't ask me why. And she, a lot of times Millie'd walk around town, she'd still have her shower cap on from when she took her shower in the morning. But she was one of a kind. And she'd give you the clothes off her back, or loan you money, or do anything. She was one of the finest people Craig ever knew.
And what did you see happen in Craig after this latest boom with the power plant?
Well, the power plant came in. We always knew that we had a lot of coal. Routt County used to have all kinds of underground mines, and the big coal person in the world, or the United States, was a guy by the name of John L. Lewis, who was back in back on the East Coast, back where some of those mines were, we had the Mount Harris mine, we had the Streeter mine. Coal was power, was what it was, and used for many different things. But the plant came in, was 4 or 5 years being built. At one time there were over 1,000 employees out there working at one time. The power that is now generated, some of it goes as far south as to the Salt River Project, which is in Phoenix. So actually some of the power from here goes all the way to Phoenix. It's down there. It changed, Craig. I think it changed it for the better. It created higher paying jobs. It brought in specialists to work there and that type of thing. It gave local people, as the rural economy, the ranching, the wheat farming and this type of thing kind of, I guess, went backwards, and as you would say, it gave those people a place to work, and kept some of the old-time families around Craig whose folks had been here and homesteaded, and they'd ranched and farmed all their life, and now they could no longer do that. So it kept some of the old core, those people, their descendants here and that type of thing, which I think was a good situation.
Right.
I've been here long enough to see 7 peaks and 7 valleys from the economy. It takes quite a while to hit the peak, but when you get to the peak and you fall off the other side and the economy goes to hell, for lack of better words, it happens awful fast. And the repercussions always seem to be worse from the fall than they were from the rise. Right now we've got a lot of drilling going on around here. I think that's good. We've got, everybody's worried about emissions from the plants and this type of thing. I have no idea. 25 years from now, everything will be different. I'm just happy I won't be here to see all the problems that some of it causes, It's just, it's a different way of life today than it was when I was growing up. I mean, I look back and say, okay, I was, my first job was 35 cents an hour, which was above the minimum scale, and you worked 8 hours a day. You worked at least a half a day on Saturday, and you worked. Today, at 16, you can't even get a job because of the child labor law unless it's a certain type of job. I mean, we were working in the oil fields. You lied about your age. You went to work in the oil fields when you were 16, or you did this or that. Everybody learned. By the time you were 11 or 12 years old, you knew how to drive a vehicle, knew how to drive a truck, knew how to drive a tractor. Some kids today still have that, but basically speaking, the kids that grow up today, they don't know what a push lawnmower was like. They don't know what a clutch in a car was for. Looking at you two, I don't know. You know how to drive a clutch? A car with a clutch?
My brother, actually, who's younger than me, knows how to, and he tried to teach me, but I still need to practice.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's, it's, and everything, everything's hydraulic now, or hydromatic, or whatever you wanna call it.
Mhm.
When we were growing up, everything was a clutch,
Mhm.
had to learn how to shift gears, had to learn how to back up.
Mhm.
You didn't have beepers on the back of your car and that type of thing to tell you just before you were
Mhm.
gonna hit something. I mean, you take a kid today and hook a trailer onto a vehicle, tell him to back it up, and he's gonna jackknife it right off the bat,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So, I mean, there's kids today, they grow up, they're successful in business and this type of thing, till they don't know how to do anything. I mean, you used to change your own oil, put new brakes on the car, do all that type of thing. Today, there's not 1 out of 20 people ever thinks to check the oil in their vehicle. They wait until the red light goes on and there's a little computer up there and says your oil's low, or
Mhm.
you need air in your left front tire, or something like that. I mean, you used to have responsibilities to take care of things mechanically. Today you don't. So, it's a changing world.
Mhm.
I can't think of anything else offhand. I'll probably go home and think of 1,000 things.
No, that was great.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. Again.
Okay, now,